So we're going to talk about the 5 different things that happen on Tish'a BeAb, and then we're going to get basically into the third one, and probably the least well-known, which is Bar Kokhba, and the destruction and the rebellion of Bar Kokhba, which I think is super fascinating and not well-known enough. So we'll get there eventually. I think actually, we'll start. We don't even need to fake it. We could just go ahead and start. Can. So you don't need source sheets. They're in the back over there if you want to take a couple over there. Thank you, Esther. So Tish'a BeAb is very depressing, but throughout Tish'a BeAb, there's a lot of glimmers of hope. So if you went to maybe Rabbi Hidari's class, Rabbi Hidari would show you that the entire reading of the Torah of Tish'a BeAb is all about hope. It's not about doom and destruction and death and all those bad things. No, there's so many good things that we have to look forward to from Tish'a BeAb. But we're going to take a different angle about that, and let's see what happened on Tish'a BeAb in general. So on Tish'a BeAb, Hamisha Devarim Erubo. There were 5 different things that happened and took place on Tish'a BeAb. First one, which is in time of chronology, right? The first thing that happened on Tish'a BeAb was all the way back in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And that was the sin of the spies, that they went for 40 days, and they saw what happened in Eretz Yisrael. They saw everything that was taking place. They came back. They gave positive reports. But then at the end, they gave their very negative opinion on that matter. And what did they say? They said, no, it's not worth it to go into the land. If we go into the land, there's no way that we're going to be able to survive. We're not going to be able to conquer the land. And that was the first thing that happened on Tish'a BeAb. Everyone starts crying and they're moaning, what are we going to do? We can't go back to Egypt. We can't stay in the desert. We don't want to go into that land. And because they cried for absolutely no reason, behinam, and thus Hashem was gozer that in the future as well, they would also cry. And that was leading to the next 2, which is the first and the second Beit HaMikdash that we know were destroyed. Important to understand the history of it. The first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed when? Destroyed by Bavel. This is the time of Yirmiyahu. And the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed in the year 586 of the Common Era. So that's basically over 2,500 years ago. The first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Yirmiyahu saw it take place. Yirmiyahu writes about it. He writes Echa regarding that first Beit HaMikdash. And that's the first destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And then you have the second destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, which takes place in the year 68 or 69 or 70, depending on who you ask, of the Common Era. So that's almost approximately 2,000 years ago that the second Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. And then you have, Harambam elaborates the most out of all of them on this third one. Ubet Tor, which we know as Betar, Hayash Shama. It was destroyed. V'hayuba alafim urevavot miYisrael. How many people lived in that area? There were hundreds of thousands of Jews that lived in Betar. When did this take place? Now that we have a little bit of the history, the city of Betar is destroyed approximately the year 135 of the Common Era. So just again, 586 before the Common Era, that's the first Beit HaMikdash, second Beit HaMikdash 68 of the Common Era, and then Betar is destroyed on Tish'a BeAb in the year 136. So you would say maybe 50 years approximately after the second Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, you have this. Now what happens in between, right, the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash and the city of Betar, which is destroyed? What's going on over here? Basically, Rome destroys the second Beit HaMikdash and it's a disaster. There's basically no Jews that have any autonomy over there, and it's very, very bad, probably the lowest point in history. But as time goes on, Jewish people are resilient, and they start to grow, and they start to build, and they start to get stronger and stronger. And there is this person called Bar Kokhba, which we're about to read about, right? So Betar is destroyed in the year 136. There's hundreds of thousands of Jews there. And there was a king. Who's this king? This was Bar Kokhba. Rambam calls Bar Kokhba a king, no less than a king. And most of the Chachamim, they believe that he was Mashiach, this Bar Kokhba. In fact, if you ever want to picture in your mind Mashiach, who is Mashiach? What is he going to be like, right? Most people imagine a rabbi with a very, very long beard, right, studying Torah all day long, very frail, with dandruff, right? That's what most people think of Mashiach, and he's going to come and there's a glowing aura around him. That is definitely not what we in Rabbinic Judaism view as Mashiach. Because Bar Kokhba was an incredibly physically impressive person, right? In order to join Bar Kokhba's revolt, what did you have to be able to do? What was like the bar to be able to join his revolt? You you had to be riding on a horse and with your hand uproot a tree as you're riding forward. Meaning, what did you really have to uproot a tree? I don't know. But in order to be part of his military campaign, you had to be tough. And he was the toughest of them all, this Bar Kokhba. And he was from the descendants of David. And he was a military man. He was a general. He was strong. He wasn't sitting in the Bet Midrash all day long. He was out there fighting battles and leading the people in the trenches. At the same time, he was extremely religious and observant. So just to paint Bar Kokhba as positive in a light as possible, we've found excavations of Bar Kokhba's revolt in tons of caves. If you want to think about like what kind of a revolt he did, just think back to the times of the Maccabees. In fact, Bar Kokhba and his generals studied the wars of the Hashmonaim in the story of Hanukkah, and they based their whole revolt against the Romans based on the revolt that the Jews did against the Greeks, right? Just one tragedy earlier. So Bar Kokhba was such a tzaddik. We have a letter of his, and this is an amazing piece of history and artifact. We have a letter from Bar Kokhba to his generals. Have you heard about this letter before? It's probably one of the most amazing pieces of history. He's sending a letter to his generals saying, Sukkot is coming up, and you guys are all on the front lines. I need you to send messengers to this city where they grow lulavim, and that city where they have hadassim and aravot, and that city where they have etrogim. I need you to round up as many of them as you possibly can and bring them to your soldiers that are fighting on the fronts of the war. Meaning, out of everything that's taking place, what did Bar Kokhba have on the forefront of his mind? To protect the Jewish people, but also to keep mitzvot, right? So again, he's not a rabbi who's sitting in the Bet Midrash all day long, and at the same time, he's not a Jew who's completely secular and is a military man like you could think, for example, maybe like Moshe Dayan, you know, the guy with the eye patch, right? Moshe Dayan was not an observant person at all. My father's uncle was a movie maker in Israel. He produced several movies, Chagiga Basnooker and Charlie Vachetzi, these very famous old Israeli movies. So he was very close with like that sort of high society kind of thing. And he got invited to Moshe Dayan's son's wedding. And he walks in, my great uncle walks into Moshe Dayan's son's wedding, and Moshe Dayan is standing there like they used to, right? The way they used to have weddings is the mother and father would stand at the beginning of the hall and they would greet everyone that would come in, and at the end of the night they would stand at the exit and they would greet everyone as they're leaving. Moshe Dayan's standing in the front over there and he's greeting people coming in, and he's wearing khaki shorts, right? And it was a collared polo, he said, with sandals, right over there at his son's wedding. And it was a completely secular wedding. It wasn't a religious wedding at all, but Moshe Dayan was one of the greatest heroes and generals that the Jewish people ever knew. But he was a completely secular person. So again, Mashiach is not a religious guy, is not a rabbi, and he's not a completely secular, right, completely off the derech guy. Mashiach is someone who has the best of both worlds. He's a military man, he's someone who's strong, he's someone who's tough, he's someone who cares about the dignity of Am Yisrael, but at the same time, right, he's someone who cares so much about Torah and will do anything in order to maintain and make sure that the Torah is being kept. And that was Bar Kokhba. Who was Bar Kokhba's biggest supporter out of anyone? Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was his biggest supporter. And he's the one that really went forward with this idea and said, you know, Bar Kokhba is Mashiach, he's the guy. But at the end of the day, Betar, which was Bar Kokhba's stronghold, it fell, and everyone died. And the pain and the suffering that took place in the time that Betar was destroyed, that Bar Kokhba's rebellion was quashed and it was destroyed, was as big of a suffering as the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. So we're all talking about the Beit HaMikdash, that it was destroyed, but over here our rabbis tell us that the destruction of the rebellion of Bar Kokhba was just as tragedy, it was just as big of a tragedy that it was. And that's why one of the 5 things that we commemorate on Tish'a BeAb is this Bar Kokhba rebellion, that it was destroyed. And it's important to learn a little bit more about it. So we saw the 4 things that took place on Tish'a BeAb, and the 5th thing is that after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, they went in with plows and they completely plowed over the entire area of Har HaBayit and basically made it like a field that you would grow crop, which is adding salt to the wound. That not only is the Beit HaMikdash destroyed, but it's completely holed over, and now they're going to build, trees and plants over there, and they're going to have different houses that are mundane and very regular in that area, which was the fifth bad thing that happened on Tish'a BeAb. So now let's talk a little bit about, we're not going to read it inside, but let's talk about what the rabbis say, what caused the destruction of Beitar. So from the year 132 to 136, Bar Kokhba says, enough of this. We're not going to be living in a land, Eretz Yisrael, and be under Roman rule. We're not having this. Even though the Romans came and said, you're not allowed to do Brit Milah, you know this whole story, but that's what was taking place at the time. You're not allowed to do Brit Milah, and many of the mitzvot that were canceled at the time. Bar Kokhba was like, I'm not having this. We're not going to stand for this. And he gathers everyone, trains these soldiers. He goes and he has this rebellion against the Romans, and he's successful. How successful is he? He's able to stage off the Roman Empire for 3 to 4 years, successfully. And they're not able to beat him. That's how powerful this Bar Kokhba was. Now, how did he fail? So there's a story. The story is super emotional. It's beautiful. I wish we would even have this minhag today. So they said that the city of Beitar, they had a minhag. Every time a baby boy was born, they would plant a tree. And every time a baby girl was born, they would also plant a tree, 2 different types of species of trees. And then as that boy and that girl would grow up, and they would come to the most momentous and joyous time of the parents of the child, they would get married, they would chop down the tree that they planted for the child, for the girl, and for the boy. And what would they do with the tree? They would take the branches of the tree and they would erect a chuppah from the plant that they would make. So it's such an emotional thing. You would pass by the tree and you would say, that's my tree. I'm going to use that tree for my chuppah. Someone would pass by and say, that's my fiance's tree. We're going to cut it down and we're going to use it for our chuppah. It was such a beautiful thing. And one day, the Roman general, his daughter is traveling on a chariot, and the chariot sort of slowly starts to break down, and it fails, right? It has a flat tire. And they're trying to figure out how to fix the chariot, and they see a tree over there on the side. So they say, all right, yalla. All of the bodyguards of the Roman emperor's daughter get out of the chariot, and they start hacking away at this tree. And they break down the tree, and they affix a new component for the chariot that they're riding for the princess of Rome. And the Jews of the town, they hear the hacking, they hear the Roman generals, and they say, what's going on over here? They go to the tree and they see that the tree was of one of the most dignified and important families of the city of Beitar. So they get very angry. And what do? They gather a whole swarm of Jews and they start rioting and they start going to the princess, right? To all of those Romans that took down the tree, and they beat them up. And they beat them up because they don't know what happened. They don't know that they had a flat tire. So they thought that they were antagonizing them. And at the end, the Roman princess and the generals, they flee back home. They go to the Roman general, whose name was Hadrian. And they say, Hadrian, the Jews are rebelling against you. And then Hadrian came with a very strong force and ended up completely destroying the city of Beitar, again, after a very long time, 3 to 4 years. Now, how bad was this destruction of Beitar? So I want to read with you just a little bit of what took place in Masechet Gittin, what it describes. So we just said over the story in the first paragraph over there in Masechet Gittin. The next paragraph says, right, Rabbi Ezra and Rabbi Yochanan say that there were 80,000 officers with trumpets that were going into the city of Beitar to take it over. And they killed the men and the women and the children until the blood of all of these people that were killed in the city of Beitar, the blood was so plentiful that it ran all the way to the river that was near Beitar. Now you say to yourself, well, how close was the river? The Gemara then goes on and says, well, the river wasn't close at all. There was so much blood from the death that took place from the massacre that the blood ran all the way to the river, which was very far away. And how much blood was there? That if you went to the river that was there that the blood fell into, you would see that it was 2 parts water and 1 part blood. That's how much blood there was. So much so that everyone who wanted to plant on that area, on the soil, years later, for 7 years, they would plant, they wouldn't need any fertilizer. Because the blood that seeped into the ground from the death of the people of Beitar lasted for 7 years to fertilize. I never knew blood was a good fertilizer. I don't know if that's even the way it works, but just to give you a picture of how much blood there was. Now, historically, the Gemara doesn't tell us exactly how many people died, but how many people would you think died in this city of Beitar? I would say, well, had I just heard about it, I would say there might have been 10,000 people that died or 50,000 of people that died. That's a lot of people, right? Historically, not by Jewish accounts, by historical accounts, we see that there were approximately 500 to 600,000 Jews that died in the destruction of Beitar. And scarier, the percentage of Jews that were alive at the time, right? That was a larger percentage of Jews that died at the destruction of Beitar than Jews that died in the time of the Holocaust. Meaning, if you take any period of Jewish history and say, what was the most amount of Jews, not amount, but rather percentage of Jews that died, it wasn't the Holocaust. It was the destruction of Beitar. And that's why this event that took place was so difficult that we listed on the level of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, because it was such a disaster for Am Yisrael. Now on the next page, we have an incredible halacha that goes back to the city of Beitar. And you all know that Birkat HaMazon is really the only beracha that we say that's deoraita. Every other beracha that you say, shehakol, or you say a beracha on your tefillin, right, lehaniach tefillin, or you say the beracha lishmoa kol shofar, or litatef betzitzit, all of those berachot that you're saying, regardless if the mitzvah is deoraita or derabanan, the fact that you're saying a beracha, that's derabanan. The Torah did not command you to say a beracha before you eat. The Torah did not command you to say a beracha before you do a mitzvah. The Torah commanded you only one time to say a beracha, and that is, ve'achalta, ve'savata, you ate, you're satiated, uverachta. And you should say a beracha, and that's referring to Birkat HaMazon. That's the only beracha that the Torah requires us to do, and that's why it's so important. So, regarding Birkat HaMazon, it went through stages. It wasn't always the Birkat HaMazon that we know of, which is why you may have seen like abridged versions of Birkat HaMazon. You're like, what does that mean, abridged versions of Birkat HaMazon? There's a Birkat HaMazon or no Birkat HaMazon. Why abridged version? And the reason is, now it makes sense, because Birkat HaMazon went through a change throughout the generations. So, if you're able to say the entire Birkat HaMazon as we have it now, very good, Hazak u'Baruch. But if you're not able to, there are things that came up later that if you're not able to, you can cut those things out and you still fulfilled your mitzvah of ve'achalta ve'savata uverachta, right? Because at the end of the day, from the times of the Torah, there was that text as well. So who made this Birkat HaMazon? It went through stages. So says the Gemara Masechet Berachot, Amar Rabbi Nachman, Moshe tiken l'Yisrael Birkat Hazan. Moshe Rabbeinu, because it's from the Torah, established that first beracha that we say in Birkat HaMazon. Now, the second beracha that we say, there's 4 berachot. The second beracha we say, Yehoshua tiken lahem, because it's all about the land of Israel. So Yehoshua, who's the one that entered into the land of Israel, as we're talking about in these upcoming parashiyot, he's the one that established that second beracha Moshe couldn't have because he didn't have a land to talk about. David u'Shlomo tiknu bonei Yerushalayim. David and Shlomo were the ones bonei Yerushalayim because before them, there was no Yerushalayim to say the beracha of bonei Yerushalayim regarding, right? Now, in that beracha bonei Yerushalayim, there's several paragraphs. David did Al Yisrael Yerushalayim u'Shlomo tiken al habayit hagadol hakadosh, because in the time of David there was no Beit HaMikdash, so he wasn't able to add that part. Shlomo added as things went along. Then you have the last beracha Birkat HaMazon, which is Hatov ve'Hametiv, the last beracha, and that was established in the city of Yavne, which was the main center of Torah scholars, and that was Keneged Harugei Beitar, corresponding to the people who died in Beitar. Every day we say Birkat HaMazon, you don't realize that the 4th beracha that you're saying is about exactly what we're talking about the destruction of Beitar. So it's a very important thing, a very underrated thing that we should know about. So what's this beracha talking about at all, right? And what is this beracha commemorating? So as big of a disaster and tragedy as it was, and we'll talk a little bit more about that disaster and tragedy, there was something that happened that was very, very inspiring. And that was when the Romans came in and destroyed Beitar, and they killed all of those hundreds of thousands of Jews. They left it. That's why the blood was seeping. They didn't bury them. They didn't remodel the city. They didn't build on the city. They just left them, and they kished. The Romans, they have a lot of cities and a lot of things to do. So they just left. They left them there. But they didn't let Jews go in for a very long time. And what happened? Once the Romans sort of let go and were like, all right, you guys do whatever you want, and it was allowed to go into Beitar and to see people's loved ones that died, to find the people who were killed, right? If you think about the tragedy that took place in Florida, right? How many people are waiting to see if their loved ones are alive or not alive, right? And that was on a minuscule scale. Think about 500,000 Jews. No one knows where they are, and there's no cell phones to be able to call you. So people were gone missing, and you didn't know if they were alive or not. And people were worried, and people were scared, and you couldn't even get to the city in order to check them out. After a while, the Romans, they leave, and they say, all right, do whatever you want. And they get into the city after a long time, and they see, first of all, that was the first miracle, that they were even able to get inside, that the Romans let go and said, go do your thing. What they see is that the people that were there were identifiable. You could see them. You could identify them. You knew who they were, and they didn't rot. They were able to be buried with some semblance of dignity to be able to get closure for what had taken place. There's nothing that's sadder and more difficult on a family member, lo alenu, that you don't see the body that you want to bury, that you don't know. So the miracle was that they let them go in eventually. But even more than that they were able to see the dead bodies, to identify them, and they hadn't decomposed from the time that they were restricted to go in until the time that they were able to. And thus, this is why we say Hatov, that Borei Olam does good for us. But not only does he do good, the Hametiv, he does even better than that one thing. He does good upon good, and that's what we say Hatov v'Hametiv. Essentially what the Baracha is trying to say is that things are terrible, but what do you have to do when things are bad? You have to see the good that's there. And that is the Jewish way. This is what the rabbis are trying to tell us by establishing this beracha for us to say all the time. You just had a delicious meal. You're sitting down, you're opening up your belt, you're full, you're satisfied. Right now things are good. But know that throughout Jewish history, it happens very frequently that things are not good, right? And there's a beracha which is called Hatov v'Hametiv, which means that when things are good, you bless Hashem for the food. You bless Hashem for the land. You bless Hashem for Yerushalayim, for the Beit HaMikdash. Beautiful. And when things suck, like in the times of the destruction of Beit HaMikdash and the destruction of Beitar, there's a beracha of Hatov v'Hametiv, to be able to recognize the berachot that Hashem gave you even upon almost annihilation. That God still does good for you, that God still blesses you and cares for you. And this is what the Aruch HaShulchan says. I'm going to read it for you in Hebrew and then translate it in English. It's really a beautiful piece. On this Hatov v'Hametiv, on source number 2 on the second page, he says, Lomar lehorot lanu, she'afilu b'sha'at ka'aso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even when God is angry and furious at us, Hu alenu oseh imanu nisim niflaot, even when a city is destroyed, He still cares about us and still does miracles on our behalf. There was, in the history of the Jewish people, not many miracles as big as this miracle to be able to go back into Beitar and to get closure for what had happened. They were sitting on the ground for years, he says. And they were still able to identify them. And then they were able to bury them. This is a sign for all of us that God never leaves us, even when we're sinning, even when we're bad, even when we are deserving of justice and retribution and destruction. Hashem still loves us and performs or shows us His love in these very odd but very unbelievable ways, like this Hatov v'Hametiv. So, who was the person that did this? We spoke about the city of Beitar, when it happened, and the main Jewish hero who was Bar Kokhba. And who did this to the city of Beitar? It was Hadrian. I went to Rome and I had a tour of the Vatican with an unbelievable Jewish tour guide. My mom is Italian, so we had a whole tour all over Italy. We went to Rome, we go to the Vatican, and we hired a Jewish woman who was a professional in Jewish history within Roman history. So instead of taking a tour and them showing you, well, these are all the history of Rome, and this was this person, this was this person, well, I don't know what that has to do with me. What she would do is she would show you, this was this emperor, and that was that emperor, and this is what that emperor did to the Jews. And he was nice to the Jews or bad to the Jews, and she framed it within a Jewish context. And it was such a meaningful thing to be able to see. So we're walking by, and then she spit on the ground. She looked around, and she spit on the ground. And I said, what was that? And she pushed me on the side, and she said, that is the bust, meaning the figure of Hadrian. And I said, that's Hadrian? She said, that's Hadrian, right? Hadrian was one of the 5 greatest emperors of Rome, and probably the worst emperor to the Jews ever. So there's 2 stories we're going to read. The first story is one that you've probably heard of. The story goes that Hadrian's walking in the streets of Jerusalem after he destroys the Beit HaMikdash. And as he's walking in the streets, a Jew who survived, right, is walking by and sees Hadrian and says, Shalom, like that. He gives him a hello. And Hadrian calls over his guards and says, reprimand that Jew, and takes him over and says, kill him. Because what, do you think you could say hi to me? Who do you think you are, you insect? You think you have the ability to go up to me and say hello to me? You're nobody. You don't have the right to say hello to me. And kills him right there on the spot. And everyone's watching. The guy just said hello to you. But no, he was angry about it and he kills the guy. The next day, he's going on his morning stroll. And a Jew's walking by. And the Jew heard about what happened the previous day. So he sort of shies away and goes in a different direction. And he goes, hey, you, come over here. What, you think that you're too good to say hi to me? And he doesn't even have a chance to explain himself. And they go and they chop off the guy's head. So this is the person that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a person who's so thirsty for blood for absolutely no reason. And this is who we were dealing with. And now if you think that this is the first time that, or the last time that we've dealt with someone like this, it's not true. We have dealt with throughout our history people like this, that it's not because we have Israel, right? Today, anti-Semitism is in the form of anti-Zionism. That the thing that we did wrong is that we're occupying territories. That's how anti-Semitism manifests itself today. But anti-Semitism is an excuse. It will find an excuse to manifest in any generation that it is by people who are cruel and want to do us wrong for no other reason than they want to do us wrong. And that's what we've seen, and that's what this story is trying to tell you, right? What did you do wrong against Hadrian? What did you do to him? You said hi, he'll kill you. You don't say hi, he's going to kill you. No matter what you do with these kind of people, they're gonna try to find a reason to get you. And that's what we have to understand, because normally, right, when someone is going out to get you, if you're a passerby, you're watching, person A is angry at person B, what would you, as a normal human being, assume? Person B did something to person A. Maybe he called him a name, maybe he yelled at him, maybe he threw something at him, maybe he stole something from him. Why would you look at a scenario in which one person hates with such a passion another person and say, well, he's just a crazy person? No, normal people, most of the time, you hate me, you hate someone, there's a reason why you hate someone, right? There must be an explanation for why you have this hatred, right? What the Gemara is trying to tell you is no. There's no reason, there's no explanation. That's why the world is so confused, because they see so much hatred towards us. So, well, there must be a reason. They must have done something. There must be an explanation for why there is so much hatred against these people. But no, there isn't. Now this last Gemara, it's very simple and easy Hebrew. It's a midrash that describes another story with Hadrian. And the story is a little bit long and it's peculiar. But I think that the message behind the story is really, really beautiful and really encompasses everything that we've spoken about so far. So the story goes, Matzah zaken echad baderech she'aya notea netiot te'enim. Hadrian is on his way to conquer a piece of land or whatever it is, and he sees a zaken echad, he sees an old man, and what is the old man doing? He's planting. The old man is planting. Amar lo Adrianos, Hadrian says to him, Ata zaken, you're old. Ve'omer ve'torech u'mityageh la'acherim. And you're planting, and you're standing, and you're working, and you're sweating. For what reason? For other people. Why are you doing this? Go sit down in your chair, enjoy, relax, read a newspaper, and take it easy. You're an old man. Why are you doing? What logic is this, or do you have for doing this? Amar lo Adoni HaMelech, listen, my king, harini notea, I'm planting. Im eske ochal meperot netiotai. If I have the zechut to live long enough to be able to eat from these fruits, fantastic. That's great. V'im lav, but if not, yochelu banai. The end of the day, my children will reap the benefit of the planting that I just did. Asa shalosh shanim b'milchama v'chazar. Hadrian went for 3 years out to war and then came back. What was he doing during those 3 years? He was destroying Beitar. That's the story that's taking place over here. That's what he was doing 3 years, destroying Beitar, and he comes back on his way back to Rome. L'achar shalosh shanim matzah le'oto zaken be'oto makom. He sees the same old man in the same exact spot that he left him 3 years earlier. Me'asa oto zaken. What did that zaken do? Netel salsila. He filled up a basket. Umile ota bikure te'enim. And he filled it with dates that he had successfully been able to grow. Yafot, and they were beautiful. V'kerev ne'adianos. And he brought them in front of Hadrian, who's tired and bloody from the wars that he had just fought. And he brings it in front of him. Amar lefanav, and he says to him, Adoni HaMelech, my king, kabel min avdecha, please accept this gift that I have in front of you. Ani hu oto zaken, I'm the same zaken that you had a conversation with 3 years prior. Right? Shematzata oti b'halichatcha, you saw me as you were walking, ve'amarta li, and you said to me, Ata zaken ma'ata mista'er omed mitagel acharim, what are you doing over here? Why are you standing and working so hard? Remember, he's almost like saying to Hadrian, you laughed at me, kind of. You were like, what are you doing? You're a foolish old man. No, what I did was good. What I did was right. God already gave me the zechut to be able to eat from these fruits. And these that are in this basket, I'm giving to you as a gift. Miyad amar adiyanus la'avadav. Immediately, Hadrian said to him, what do you think he's going to say to him? He's going to say thank you? Robert, you would say thank you, but we're dealing with Hadrian. He's not a nice guy like you. What's Hadrian going to do? I don't know. I'm reading the story like my imagination's running wild. What kind of torture is this? He's going to hang him from the tree that he just had these fruits from? What is he going to do to him? It's scary. What is he going to do to him? Yeah. Okay. Telu ota mimenu umil'u ota zehuvim ve'asu kach. It sounds, this is the beauty of the Midrash, it sounds like he's saying, hang him. But by telu ota, it's not referring to the old man, it's referring to the basket. Hang the basket. You're reading your telu ota, it says hang him. Oh, you're like, oh no, he's going to hang him on the same tree that he built. He's a disaster, crazy person. No. It's such a positive thing. He says, telu ota, hang it. Like, it's so beautiful. I want it hanging in my throne. Right? Umil'u ota zehuvim ve'asu kach. And then take a basket and fill it with gold coins. So, oh no, what is he going to do? He's going to take the gold coins and he's going to kill him with the gold coins. What is he going to do? No! He takes a basket full of gold coins. And he goes home and he's happy. Like a successful, wealthy man. He planted a tree. He gets a basket full of gold coins from the king nonetheless. And he's so happy. And his wife and his children are praising him. And he's so happy from this experience. And the word gets out. People start talking about it. Like every neighbor looks at his fellow neighbor and says, the wife says, why don't you be more like this guy? Why does he have, right, a Lexus and we only have a Volvo? Like, what is going on over here? Why can't you be more like that guy? So the wife of the neighbor says to her husband, what are you doing? Didn't you hear what happened over here? And it's actually very funny the language that she says to him. She says to him, Amra leva'ala, kol bnei adam holchin v'akadosh baruch hu noten lahem u'zamen lahem tova. Every person, they go out into the world and they do business, and God gives them based on what they do. V'ata yoshev bebayit chashuk va'ofel. You're sitting like a bum in the house, not doing anything. That's why nothing ever good happens, because you're a bum. Harei shachen shelanu, our neighbor, kibed et hamelech, he respected and gave honor to the king, basal sila, with this basket shel te'enim, mile oto lo zehuvim, and he gave him a basket full of gold coins. V'ata amod, get up, v'tol sal gadol, and take a very similar basket, umale oto kol minei megadim, and fill it with all different types of beautiful things. Min tapuchim, may it be apples, ute'enim, ushar perot yafot, shehu ohev otan arbeh. We know that the king likes these, so go fill it and go give it to him. Lech lechabedo b'ahen, go and honor him with him. Shema yimale lecha zehuvim, maybe he's going to give you a basket full of gold coins as well. Kemo she'asa lishkaninu hazaken, like this old man, our neighbor. Halach v'shama lishto. So he listened to his wife. That was his first mistake. Unless you have a very good wife. ונטל סל גדול ומילא אותו כל מיני מגדים, תאנים וטבוחים וטען על כתפו וקרב לפני המלך קופנדר. And he goes and fills it up with a basket of all different types of fruits and brings it forward towards the king. Ve'amad ve'amar, Adoni HaMelech, he says the same words, he didn't change. He did the same thing. Adoni HaMelech, my king, my liege, shamati shata ohev et haperot. I heard that you love these fruits. Ubati lechabedcha b'te'anim v'tapuchim. And I came to honor you with these dates and with these apples. Amar HaMelech l'sar tidyon, shelo telu uto mimenu v'tipchu otan al panav. Again, telu oto. Before it was telu ota. Hang it. The female basket, but now it's telu oto, hang him, right? Hang him, and take those very same fruits that he brought and egg him with the fruits that he got. It was a bad choice with apples, right? Tomatoes would have been better, right? That's what they throw at all of the bad comedians. But the apples definitely will hurt. They strip him down naked. They start punching him and they start chucking things at him until his whole face is swollen and is blistered from this experience. Simu et enav, they end up blinding him as well. Chazak Baruch for everything, Bobby. Thank you. And they blind him and they make an example out of him for having done this tragic, terrible thing of giving gifts to the king. What a terrible person. And he gets home, he's stumbling home, and he's all bruised, and he's blind, and he's battered, and he gets home. She hears him coming, and she's convinced that he must have came with this full of gold. She sees him in this distressed state. What happened to you? Why did this happen to me? Because I listened to you, my wife. That I went to honor the king with this. And if I had done more and listened to your advice and I brought etrogim, how much worse it would have been if I had listened to you to the full extent of what I listened to. Why? To teach you that a bad wife can cause so much damage as we saw over here in this case. Now, here's where the Midrash gets so beautiful. It says, therefore, what's the message of the story? I don't know. What am I supposed to gather and conclude from the story that we just read? I don't know. Don't give apples to someone that might throw them at you. What's the message over here? So the message over here, the Midrash says is, Lo yebatel adam min hanetiot. Never stop planting. Like that old zaken. That old zaken was planting. And it ended up working out for him. But for his neighbor, it didn't work out. But it did work out for the zaken. So what are you going to do? Are you going to be like the neighbor? Or are you going to be like the zaken? For the zaken, it might have worked out. It might have not worked out. But at the end of the day, because he planted, he saw the fruits of his labor. If he had not planted, he wouldn't have seen anything. Nothing good would have happened. So the Midrash is trying to tell you something profound. Even if you're old. What does that mean, even if you're old? Even if you're old and everything that you had planted beforehand died out and ceases to exist, you may come and say, well, we did this already. We tried and we failed. Am Yisrael. We tried and we failed every single time. We rose up, we built one Beit HaMikdash, we got destroyed. Okay, we went to Galut. Then these guys, Ezra and Nehemiah, were like, well, let's try it again. And they built it again, and then it got destroyed. And then Bar Kochva said, let's try it again. And what happened? He revolted, he was successful, and then he failed. Now, this Midrash is speaking to the Jewish people in the Golah, and what might we conclude from what we have seen through history? Hajj already! Stop trying! Stop planting! Every time you plant, it gets destroyed. What the Midrash is trying to tell you, sometimes it does get destroyed. But sometimes you get to enjoy the fruit of your labor. And even if you do not get to enjoy the fruit of your labor, at least your children will be able to enjoy the fruit of your labor. And then the Midrash ends as follows. Learn from me, says Hashem. I planted Gan Eden. I didn't need Gan Eden. I don't need the fruits of Gan Eden, but I planted Gan Eden nonetheless. Now, what's the deep part of this Midrash? Why is God saying this? Because what happened in Gan Eden? It was a failure. Gan Eden failed. Adam Harishon sinned. He kicked them out of Gan Eden. It didn't work as planned, but still what did Hashem do? He continued on. Even when God, so to speak, fails, He doesn't say, already, all right, that's not going to work. It's not worth it anymore. I'm going to stop this. No, even Hashem failed and continues on. If Hashem fails and continues on, that is our obligation. And even if we do not see the fruits of our labors, we have an obligation to do so because at the end of the day, maybe our children will see the fruits of our labors. So us on Tish'a BeAb, we hear these terrible, tragic stories of the Beit HaMikdash, the first, the second, the destruction of Beitar. Don't lose hope. Our rabbis are trying to teach us that the only reason why we are here now and that we are alive and that we could study Torah on Tish'a BeAb and we could even go to Yerushalayim is because our ancestors did not give up. They failed and they failed and they failed, but even when they were Zekenim, even as a nation, we're Zaken, we're so old. We cannot give up. We have to persist. We have to think about the future generations that Hashem will, inshallah, bless us with Nehamat Zion b'mehera v'amenu. Amen. Chazak Baruch.